Layer 4 is the first layer of actual creative writing. I use the scene outlines from layer 3 to write the individual scenes. I split the Scrivener binder into 4 parts representing the 4-part structure, as shown in the graphic to the right. I copy each scene outline into one document under the part it belongs in. The documents contain only one scene each at this point. Here is a closer picture showing how I split the binder section of Scrivener into parts 1 to 4. I copy each scene outline into one document under the part it belongs in. I go through my outline, setting up the documents underneath the proper sections. I don't worry if certain parts are heavier than others, because by focusing on the clues and the crime only so far, it will be out of balance. But I know in later layers it will even out. By using the outlines and only writing one scene at a time, it gives me a bird's eye view of the manuscript in this early stage. During this process, my mind is still creating. I'm the story creator still. I'm writing in this section, but not yet as an author. I'm still the story creator who has to write it all down first. During this process, I always decide to move a scene here or there, or another suspect or another character will pop into my head, and I can easily add and or subtract by using this system. It's all best explained while in Scrivener, so let's pop into Scrivener now. Okay, so I'm going to pop into Scrivener here, and this is my present book that I'm writing, Peek Behind the Novel. It doesn't have a name yet. So I just wanted to explain how this all works. So I am just starting to write the first draft. So the first few documents have actual, paragraphs and dialogue and whatever. But I really want you to focus on the binder over here, this gray section. So I first start out by breaking it into the 4 parts, part 1, part 2, part 3, and 4 underneath. I also am tracking the passage of time, because in this story, there is a passage of time that's very important to the plot line. So I have to keep track of that. Now, I also am tracking the time, the day and the time. I'm also tracking when the lead characters, Jack and Fiona, are working the case and when they're at lunch and they're talking personal, because I have to intertwine the subplots into the crime story. Okay, so this is how it all works. So as I move down further here, you can see I just have the outlines. Okay. And we talked about this in a previous video where I just put everything in the outline that I want to be in the scene. And then by the time I get to the end of the scene, I can check and make sure I didn't forget anything. Okay, so that helps me. So in this first draft, I don't normally start putting anything in the synopsis. I think when I was writing this time, I was just throwing things over here to try to save some time in the next layer. But it's okay if you don't put anything up here right now. And in the notes section, I already said in a past video, what I really do is I start out, I copy and paste this scene outline into the notes so that I have it like for the duration of the project. I can always go back and see where I was starting from. Now, I'm going to close this inspector box here. This is the document we're looking at, and now I'm going to click on my draft, and I'm going to click on the corkboard. Now, a lot of people like to use the corkboard, but they don't give you enough space, which is why I like the concept, but I just write too much in my outlines for this to really make any sense to me. But what I do like is this outline view right over here. And in this early stage, I have no keywords, I have no metadata. That goes in another layer of writing. Right now, I basically have titles and synopsis. And I'll just close this over here if I can. So by stretching this out, this gives me a bird's eye view of the project, of the manuscript, even in just an outline form. So as I'm writing now the first draft and I get a new idea and I think it's a better idea, it's very easy to just flip down here and find what I'm looking for, to either change it, or I can quickly add a scene in here to add this new thing that I'm thinking about. So I like this bird's eye view because it helps me as I'm still in these early creative phases of putting the script and the actual storyline together. So anyway, I hope this is helpful to someone. We haven't talked about all the landmarks yet. We'll cover them in more detail in later videos, but I do keep them in mind, the landmarks and each section of the structure where they belong. So in part one, you will have the hook, and the hook is meant to hook the reader into the story. But it's too soon now to choose a definitive hook. I have ideas about it by this time, but I don't commit to it as yet. It's still too early. But part one will contain the crime scene, the initial clues, as well as eyewitness interviews. The detectives will also decide to go on their quest to solve the case. In a police procedural, I like to have between 2 to 4 suspects, and I like to reveal at least 2 by the end of part 1. By the end of part 1, the reader likes to be trying to guess who it is already, and I like to keep that in mind. The landmarks of part 2 in a police procedural will be more clues that arise, more interviews, video surveillance, and the analyzation of the evidence as it comes in. Part 2 begins a slow trickle of this additional evidence, both physical evidence as well as oral. There is also CCTV and security video in contemporary mysteries, as well as forensic evidence. This too will need to trickle in. The detectives analyze the clues, and they both bring different insights into solving the crime. By the end of part 2, this is now the middle of the book. As a rule of thumb, I like to have all but one suspect named and already in the mix. I like to end the midsection on a revelation that twists the plot, where the detectives are now looking for someone or something that takes them now into a new direction. In part 3, I will have all of my suspects named. If there's one still hidden, an unusual suspect, he or she will appear then in the early stage of part 3. The title of most likely suspect may go back and forth between all the suspects in this part. In part 3, this is where the big and little lies are uncovered. These nice witnesses or nice people are revealed to be flawed humans and may be more capable of crime or murder than originally thought. Towards the end of part 3, there could be a dark night of the soul. This means the culprit may appear like he is going to get away with it, or the detectives know he or she did it, but they can't find legal evidence, or there may be some other confrontation that occurs. Every story is different. At the end of part 3, the crime is not yet solved, but it's being secretly set up to be solved in the next part. Part 4 is broken into 2 parts. The first section is the big reveal. This means that the culprit is exposed, or caught, or captured. The circumstances of this takedown can be surprising or psychologically shocking, or some writers may like their alpha male detectives to be more physical in the takedown. In any event, the initial section of Part 4 is about the big reveal of who the culprit really is. Once the case is solved, I like to do a wrap-up. This is a quick review of how the culprit did the crime and hid it from everyone. I do this because I think most readers have busy lives and sometimes they are reading every word of the book, but at other times they may be reading with one eye open as they fall asleep for the night. I do this all the time. By going over the entire plot quickly, I fill in any holes the reader may have from missing something. This way, the plot goes click at the end for them too. But I do this very quickly so as not to bore the other readers who do pay attention to every word. But I also like to reveal any red herring or other witnesses that may have looked really guilty at some point. I mention, usually in detective dialogue, how the other suspects couldn't have done it. This is also where you acknowledge the foreshadowing that you dropped along the way. It's important to wrap up any loose ends in the story as well as revealing the guilty party. The second section of Part 4 is showing the new normal. This will show the character growth that took place over the days or weeks the investigation took place. It also resolves where the characters are in their personal lives when this investigation ends. This is sort of wrapping up the subplots. If you write series like I do, it's important to have a resolution of some character growth in each book. Each book doesn't have to be a happily ever after, but there has to be some stable respite, a point of stability they have reached where the reader knows the characters are okay and are now changed. Some level of their personal lives must resolve in some way, but you also need to leave a clue that their story continues. In a police procedural, there will be other cases and their personal lives will continue on. If I had to give 5 tips to beginners about writing a first draft, they would be these. Number 1, write forward only. Don't look back. It's a waste of time. It's too early to worry about the details. Number 2, don't worry about spelling, grammar, verb tense, too many overused words, etc. It's a waste of time. Number 3, the goal of this first draft is to get it down on paper and to make sure you put everything from your scene outlines into the story. Number 4, you're just really blurting out the story. Nothing else matters but to just get the whole story down on paper. And number 5, the last tip is to just keep moving forward. Trust the system and just keep writing. I've reached layer 4 now in my personal novel. This layer takes time to get it all down on paper. By not worrying about the prose or grammar, I'm free to create and focus only on my story. I'm still the story crafter, not yet the author. The first draft is just that. It's only a first draft. No one will see it. It's only for my eyes only. Rest assured that the first draft is important, but by the time you get all the way to layer 8, it will be polished and won't look anything like this first draft. I hope my revelations of how I plot and write will prompt other authors to reveal their process. I love to learn new techniques. When I was brand new, learning from experienced authors was so very helpful. Be sure to sign up at readfirstchapter.com to get on my mailing list. I send book promotions once a week, notices of new ebook releases, and notices of when my books list for free on Amazon. I'll see you in the next video.